We'll move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was humiliated into changing his position on his toxic taxes just 38 days after his budget of broken promises. Despite this Olympic-level backflip, can the Prime Minister name a single country that will have a higher tax rate on real capital gains than Australia?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks for the question. Well, on budget night, we made it very clear that we foreshadowed Treasury's discussion paper. It was all there for all to see. But of course, for those who were busy hyperventilating and saying they were opposed to things before they even saw legislation, they didn't look at that detail. We outlined that the implementation would happen in steps, far less steps than happened the last time that there was major tax reform way back under the Howard government, in which there were something like 30 separate pieces of legislation. So what we've done is to continue to consult. We will continue to do that. On small business, on top of retaining all 4 of the existing capital gains tax concessions for small businesses, we're also increasing the turnover threshold for small business to access the 50% capital gains tax discount from $2 million to $10 million. And that's a 5-fold increase. And what that means is that every active small business will be included in that. What it means is that 98%, indeed, of all active businesses in Australia will be included in that as well. There's now $3.8 billion in the budget that lowers taxes and provides support for small businesses, making the $20,000 instant asset write-off permanent.
Order. The member for Herbert will pause. Order. The Leader of the Nationals in the House of Representatives, the Treasurer, we're going to hear the Leader of the Opposition on his point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. I asked whether a single country will have a higher real capital gains rate than Australia.
Yeah. The Prime Minister is... Order. Members on my left. Standing orders provide that the Prime Minister must be directly relevant to the question, and the question regarding the budget, the tax position of the government, which the Prime Minister is being directly relevant to, is answering the question. But I can appreciate you would like a direct answer. I can't compel the Prime Minister to do that, but I'll encourage him to make sure he is being directly relevant. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. What we've done is what we said we'd do on the budget night. Consult widely, back small business to succeed and grow, make the tax system fairer, and make sure that young Australians get a fair crack. That's what we've
Members
done.
on my left will cease
what those
interjecting.
opposite have done is continue to do what
Minister
they've
for
done
Northern
the
Australia.
entire time since this gentleman here replaced Susan Lee. After that infamous meeting on the day of a funeral in Melbourne. And he promised there that he would restore faith in the coalition, and what we've seen since then is being diminished each and every day. And the worse he goes, the more he interjects, Mr Speaker. The worse he goes, the more he interjects.
Order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Corangamine.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government backing the aspiration of more Australians to get ahead and own a home of their own? How does the government's housing agenda make a positive difference to people's lives, and what alternatives are being offered?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Corangamite for her question, and each and every day our government's driven by making a real and positive difference in people's lives, delivering real change to make a real difference, doing what's right rather than just doing what is easy, not just pointing issues out but trying to take action to fix them, delivering real change that Australians can see and they can feel. And what we're doing in housing is an example of that. Not an abstract idea. Housing is the key to a better life for people. It's the key to a better education for your kids, to better health care, to a quality of life. And that's why over 4 years we've thrown everything at housing supply. The Housing Australia Future Fund, Build to Rent, Help to Buy, all part of our Homes for Australia plan. And last week I went to the Housing Australia Future Fund site in Jakarta in Canberra. 57 social and affordable homes under construction, right where they're needed. Just part of the 55,000 social and affordable homes which are being built, a program that those opposite say that they would abolish. In Clifton Springs, in Victoria, I met Brooklyn, Lockie and Dog Roscoe with the member for Corangamite. Now, they bought their own home using a 5% deposit. And what they said to me was that renting was frustrating because our money wasn't going anywhere, but now it is, going into a real asset for this family. And that's the real change that we're delivering. I've been to Prospect in Adelaide, in Perth, in Hobart, in Stones Corner in Brisbane, Rosanna in Jagga Jagga in Melbourne, all seeing the difference that our policies are having. Because for too long the housing system was broken, prioritising investors looking to buy their 10th property and locking out young people looking for their first home. And that's why we're reforming negative gearing and capital gains tax so that hard-working Australians can actually see their hard work pay off, making a real difference. That's how you back aspiration. Aspiration for all, not just for some. Delivering real change to make a real difference.
Good call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that Australia will have the highest tax rate on real capital gains in the world?
Good call to the Treasurer. Order. The Treasurer has the call. The Leader of the Opposition is going to. The Treasurer hasn't said a word, so we'll listen to the Treasurer now.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the Opposition Leader for the question. The changes that we are making are about fairer tax arrangements for capital gains so that the taxes only apply to real gains.
The Treasurer will pause. We're not going to have that sort of sledging, member for Page. It's just not something I want to have in this House. So I'm just going to ask you to withdraw that, and we're just going to try and refrain both sides, everyone's language. We just don't need that.
I withdraw.
I thank the member for Page for being gracious. Well, the Treasurer, that's not helpful when the member for Page is withdrawing something for you to make that remark either. Well, I didn't hear what he said, but I think to assist the House, I agree with the manager. The member for Page did the right thing. I'm just going to ask the Treasurer to withdraw and then just get back to the question and do the business of the House.
Thank you, Speaker. I withdraw. Mr Speaker, comparing tax rates on real and nominal gains is deliberately disingenuous from those opposite. What they don't understand or don't concede, Mr Speaker, is that there will still be a discount for capital gains, but it will be a fair reflection of inflation rather than the Howard approach, which has distorted investment in our economy for a quarter of a century now, Mr Speaker. Now, the exact discount will vary, but history suggests in many cases it would be in the range of 30 to 50% or even more, Mr Speaker. Under our changes, the Treasury estimates the average tax rate on gross capital gains will increase from 19.3% to 21.4% at the end of the medium-term when the policy is close to maturity. So if you use those reasonable assumptions, Mr Speaker—
The Treasurer will pause, and I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition to make his first point of
relevance, Mr Speaker. To answer the question, he needs to name just one country, only one country.
Order. The Treasurer was asked a specific question. It was narrower than the first. I'm just going to make sure he's being directly relevant. But he is not straying off that. He's not talking about opposition policies. He's talking about the government's policies. So I'm just going to listen carefully to make sure he's being directly relevant.
So, Mr Speaker, as I was saying, on reasonable assumptions, 5.1% rate of return, S&P, ASX 200, the tax rate is 21.4%, for example. That is lower than the UK at 24%. It's lower than Germany, 26 to 28%. It's lower than France, 34 to 35%. It's lower than Ireland, 33%. It's lower than the Netherlands, 36%. It's lower than Denmark, 42%, and not a country, Mr Speaker, but also lower than California, which is the tech capital of the world, Mr Speaker. I just said that, Mr Speaker, and as I said to the Leader of the Opposition—
Order.
Now, Mr Speaker, we know what's really going on here, Mr Speaker. Those opposite had the opportunity to vote to make it easier for first home buyers and to cut taxes for workers, and they voted against both of those things, Mr Speaker. And whether it's this right-wing party or that right-wing party or that right-wing party, Mr Speaker, they are all the same. Whenever they're given the opportunity to vote in the interests of working people or young people or first home buyers, they vote directly against the interests of those Australians. We are proud to support them.
The call to the honourable member for Cornwall.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government helping with the cost of living and helping Australians get ahead? How does that compare to other approaches?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, for that question from an absolute champion, the member for Cornwall. Thank you for your question. Helping people with the cost of living is a primary focus of this Albanese Labor government. That's why the Prime Minister announced on the weekend that we'll be extending that fuel excise relief for another month, making petrol and diesel 16 cents a litre cheaper and saving Australians about $11 per tank, Mr Speaker. This is more temporary and tapered support that will help take the sting out of petrol prices and help more Australians with the cost of living. And that's because, despite the welcome and very substantial drop in the price of petrol in recent months, we recognise that people are still under pressure. And this extra month of fuel relief will help Australian motorists and businesses with the cost of living, even as this support begins to taper off. But it's not the only way that we're helping people with the cost of living. We're cutting taxes for 13.3 million workers again and again. We've got 5 tax cuts in all, Mr Speaker. We've got better pay for workers, and we're delivering a fair go for first home buyers as well, Mr Speaker. Now, as it turns out, from next week, the national minimum wage will increase by 6%. Modern award wages will increase by 4.75%, following that good decision from the Fair Work Commission, advocated for by this Labor government and this Employment Minister. From next week as well, Mr Speaker, our tax cuts for more than 14 million Australians will start to roll out, one of those 5 ways that we're cutting taxes for workers. And the tax reforms we've put before the parliament will help younger Australians get ahead and get a fair go, particularly for first home buyers. Now, Mr Speaker, as I was saying a moment ago, this is what separates us from the 3 right-wing parties in Australia over there, Mr Speaker. We're delivering tax cuts for every taxpayer, better pay for workers and a fair go for first home buyers, and the 3-ring circus over there is standing in the way of all 3 of those things, Mr Speaker. That is the absurd irony of Australia's political system. The One Nation Party talks a lot about helping workers, and the Coalition talk a lot about tax cuts, but they vote against both of those on the floor of the parliament, Mr Speaker. Every time they have the opportunity to vote for higher wages and lower taxes, the right-wing parties opposite, instead of voting the way that the workers of this country need them to do, they vote the way that Gina Rinehart and Jeff Wilson tells them to do, Mr Speaker. Or whether it's slashing the fuel tax, better pay, tax cuts or a fair go for first home buyers, we are taking action and delivering real change to ease the cost of living and help Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn. The three right-wing parties over there, they're standing in the way of our tax cuts, better pay and a fair go for first home buyers in this country.
Before I call the member for Clare, I'll just do some quick acknowledgements and I will give him the call. I'm pleased to inform in the House in the gallery today in their red and white T-shirts are representatives of Bowel Cancer Australia, along with a delegation of patient advocates, reminding everyone that it's never too young to be tested. Her Excellency Mrs. Carla Nula Rensola Gosa, the Ambassador of Portugal to Australia, is with us today. Apologies for my pronunciations. And also, members in the gallery today, we have the Wangaratta High School and Mansfield Secondary School as guests of the member for Indi. On behalf of the House, welcome to Question Time. I give the call to the honourable member for Clare.
To the Veterans Affairs Minister. As you know, our veterans deserve the very best care our country can provide. Bathurst RSL sub-branch has submitted a proposal for a Veterans and Families Wellbeing Hub in Bathurst, which would serve as stage 1 of a Central West regional hub. They've got the land, they've got the building, and they're willing to make a financial contribution to it. Will your government support it, and when will you fund it?
Call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for his question. And I also thank him for having me out to his electorate to meet with the local RSL to hear what they want to do there in terms of having a hub to support the veterans in his community. And they really did an excellent job of explaining the real-world impact, meeting with the RSL members, the advocates working out there, the support they want to be able to provide on his side of the range. And I thank him for passing on to me their business case as well for how they want to set up that hub and have it running on an ongoing basis. We've been delivering hubs across the country that we committed to at the 2022 and 2025 election. They are an important part of the broader ecosystem and footprint to support our veteran communities, in particular where we've got the highest concentration of those veteran communities around the country. Right now, we're rolling out from the 1st of July the changes to the Veterans Entitlement legislation. That's going to be the biggest change in a century, moving from 3 complex systems that were interacting with each other to a single system going forward to improve the system that supports our veterans, making it quicker and easier for their claims to be processed. But also importantly, in implementing another recommendation of the Royal Commission from 1 July, we stand up the new Veteran and Family Wellbeing Agency. And it is going to coordinate across those Veterans and Families hubs that we already have up and running in terms of providing an on-the-ground footprint, but providing a national service, online, phone, to navigate the systems of support more broadly that exist there in the broader wellbeing areas to support our veterans, which is incredibly important work. As we work through setting that up and the different other services that will be provided through that agency and funded by that agency, it's important we get that right moving forward in the near term. That's an important piece of work, both in terms of the agency itself and working with the existing hubs. As we work through that, we are then able to better look at a wide variety of submissions that have been made to government for a further round of hubs and supports to local ex-service organisations, be them RSLs or other organisations, that want to improve how they can deliver better support to veterans and families on the ground. And we really want to support that, and we want to make sure we work through that in a methodical way as we stand up these big changes that are improving support to our veteran community. I've looked at the business case that's been provided by the member. I very much appreciate it and look forward to trying to work through that after we've stood up the Wellbeing Agency from 1 July this year. Thank you.
Call to the honourable member for Gilmore.
Is to the Minister for Transport. How is the Albanese Labor government acting to keep fuel supplies flowing, and how will the government's extension of fuel relief help keep fuel prices down so we can keep communities connected and our freight moving?
Call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Gilmore for her question? She well knows the impact that the Middle East conflict has had on regional communities and the price of fuel in those communities. But can I also start very much by thanking Australians. You've been really magnificent through this. done an incredible job in working with government to make sure that we can keep fuel and our freight operators moving around the country. We've been working very closely with industry and our international partners to ensure fuel continues to flow and that we keep our communities connected. On Saturday, the Prime Minister announced that the Export Finance Australia had secured with the private sector a further 50 million litres of diesel and that this shipment is now headed for Port Botany. Since February, we've secured additional supplies of nearly 800 million litres of diesel, 155 million litres of jet fuel and 340,000 tonnes of fertiliser. There is now more fuel in the country than there was in February this year before the conflict began. By securing our fuel supply, we are providing certainty. But we do know supply is just part of the story here. The war in the Middle East has caused the biggest spike in fuel prices. That's why we've worked quickly to cut fuel excise to save Australians money at the petrol pump. And because freight is the backbone of this economy, we've also moved to cut the road user charge for heavy vehicles. We've seen fuel prices come down from their peaks in April, but we do recognise that people are still doing it tough. And while we have weathered this crisis well, we know that it will take a while for global fuel movements to recover. It's why the Prime Minister announced yesterday that we are extending fuel excise cuts well into July, saving Australians 16 cents per litre, or around $11 per tank. But what we're also doing is continuing to the reduction of the fuel excise in the road user charge through to July as well. That is critical for our freight industry, critical for our trucking industry to be able to continue to move goods and services around this country. The support, of course, has been welcomed by the Australian Trucking Association, and I recognise their strong advocacy on behalf of their members, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Australian Automobile Association and the businesses that have kept our goods moving all the way around our country. This is additional support for Australians as global fuel movements remain constrained, and it builds on the work that we've been doing since the beginning of this crisis to support the transport industry. Work like amending contract chain orders through the Fair Work Commission, zero-interest loans for eligible SMEs through the National Reconstruction Fund, and more support through the ATO for businesses who are facing fuel-related financial pressures. When things are uncertain around the world, we're focused on helping Australians at home, and it might be good to get a question from those opposite about this important issue.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for order. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my questions to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, can you confirm that even after the budget backflip, over your time in office, the Albanese Labor government is the highest taxing government in Australia's history?
Order. Members on my right, the Minister for Infrastructure, Member for Lindsay. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, but in fact it was the Howard government that is the highest taxing government. And those opposite, if they had their way, went to the last election calling for $75 billion in higher personal income taxes. They wanted $14 billion of higher taxes.
Order. Pause. No. Well, just to help the House, we're going to respect the dignity of the House, as all speakers have done, which is allow the opposition to withdraw that remark. Thank you. Leave the opposition. We're not going to have the yelling. If anyone yells and screams, they're not going to stay here. No Australian wants to see that. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. They wanted $14 billion of higher taxes on the resources and manufacturing sectors by abolishing production tax credits. Yep. They want higher taxes on motorists by abolishing the EV concession. Yep. They want higher taxes on housing construction by abolishing build-to-rent.
Member for Bennelong will cease from objecting.
They want higher student debts for more than 3 million Australians because they said they'd cancel the 20% cut.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Herbert is rejecting the member for Page and point of order.
Yeah, Speaker, the point of order is relevant. I asked about the government's tax policies, not the opposition's.
Well, I listened in about the first 6 seconds. The Prime Minister did answer that directly. He gave a direct answer when he was asked the question, can he confirm that over his time in office is the highest governing tax in government Australia? He's answered that, and now he's giving some contrast. So if you're asking those sorts of questions, you're going to get some contrast out of it. But he has been directly answering the question. Order. 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 We'll deal with this and then I'll hear from the manager.
But can you let the Speaker decide who does what rather than you?
Order. Yep. Okay, resume your seat. I thank the manager for defending me. Order. I do. I appreciate that. I do. Always. To the point of order, the Prime Minister, and the manager will hear from him.
That was the very nature of the question, and therefore I'm entitled to give a comparative analysis, which is precisely what I've been doing, having first answered the question in the first seconds, as you correctly have said.
So we're just going to deal with this way, and the manager, I said I'd give him a fair. I'll give him a fair go, and he'll get that now.
The comparison is between governments, and the Prime Minister isn't being relevant. Right? Okay. Governments. Right, you're the highest taxing government in Australia.
Yeah. I'll help the House. I'll help the House. But when you say, "Are you the highest?" that implies a comparison, right? Hang on. Yeah. But if you're asking a question about are you the highest, obviously a minister may say they're not, and they're going to explain why. Okay. The member for McEwen is warned. Just allow the House to settle, and we'll get the Prime Minister back to the question being directly relevant.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. They have interesting tactics measures, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker. Because the fact is that the Howard government was the highest taxing government, as I have said. The fact is also that those opposite have opposed the measures that we have put in place to provide support for personal income tax cuts. They've opposed the measures to cut student debt. They've opposed the measures for free TAFE, which makes a difference. They've opposed the tax arrangements that we've put in place to encourage people to have, whether it's EVs or the cheaper batteries program. They've opposed all of these measures, Mr. Speaker. We on this side have put forward no less than 5 tax cuts. 5 tax cuts, one of which, of course, clicks in next week for 14 million Australians. And if the Leader of the Opposition had been the Treasurer rather than the worst shadow Treasurer Australia's ever seen, what we would have seen is higher taxes. That wouldn't have occurred. That was the policy that they took to the election, Mr. Speaker. Instead, we get a tax cut and we get another tax cut next year.
Order. Look, don't shake your head. I heard you say it, so you're just going to withdraw that. We're not going to. I thank the Leader of the Opposition. So just people respect the standing orders in the institution. We won't have to stop. Okay. Before I call the member for Jagga, order. We're going to allow the House to settle because it is local government week. So that means we're going to give a shout out to some local representatives, and I'd like to do that now because they've come to the parliament. I want to recognise them. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is Councillor Tanya Brown, the Lord Mayor of Wollongong, as guest of the member for Cunningham and Whitlam. We've got the Mayor, Tanya Taylor, the Mayor of Willoughby, as the guest of the member for Bradfield. The Mayor of Townsville, Nick DeMeadow, from Queensland, and the CEO of the Townsville City Council is here as the guest of the member for Herbert. And also Mayor Clare Ponton and the Deputy Mayor of Midcoast Council are sitting in the gallery as guests of the member for Lyne. Welcome to all our local government friends and look forward to seeing you this week. Give the call to the honourable member for Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How has the Albanese Labor government acted to strengthen Australia's fuel security and shield Australians from the impacts of the conflict in the Middle East? What policies would leave Australians more vulnerable?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the question and also recognise the invaluable work she does as a member of our climate and energy team in this government, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, in the face of the most serious energy crisis the world has ever seen, this government had the view that a very serious response was required. And that response involved the Prime Minister interacting with leaders in our region to ensure fuel security. It involved the government working with Export Finance Australia to get extra fuel for Australians. And it involved working closely with the private sector in the face of great challenges, including one of our refineries catching on fire at the worst possible time. Now, Mr Speaker, in the face of all those challenges, I'm pleased to tell the House that Australia has more fuel today than at any time since the minimum stock obligation came into force, and that, Mr Speaker, we have substantially more fuel than we had on the day Iran was bombed. We have 44 days' worth of petrol, which is 8 days more than the day Iran was bombed. We have 39 days' worth of diesel, which is 7 days more, and we have 3 days more worth of jet fuel at 32 days. And there are 51 ships on the water currently, Mr Speaker, on their way to Australia with more fuel and 3.9 billion litres of orders locked in and contracted to be delivered over the next 4 weeks. So Australians can know that just as we have since February 28th been telling them that our fuel supply is secure, that situation remains and remains into the future. Now, there was a choice for people in public office to engage seriously with these challenges or to engage in politics, to engage in solutions or to engage in sledges. Those opposite chose sledges, Mr Speaker, and chose insults, not ideas. They said to Australians that the shortages were coming and that rationing was coming. One nation, the parties to the right, one nation actually called for rationing, demanded rationing. We had the view that a calmer approach was necessary. We had the view that steadier approach was necessary. And the member for Wannon, my shadow minister, warned that rationing and shortages were coming. He said in March they were coming in April. And he said in April they were coming in May. And he said in May they're coming in June, Mr Speaker. In April, he said, I'd say to Chris Bowen very clearly, the time is that he focuses on diesel and made sure we're going to have supplies into May and June. Well, I've got good news for the member for Wannon, Mr Speaker. That is the case, and it's the case into the future as well. And that's what this government has achieved. And we thank the private sector. We thank our trading partners for working closely with us. We do not thank those who engaged in sledges, not solutions, Mr Speaker. There was a time, as the Minister for Transport indicated, we got questions to those opposite about these issues. But now, Mr Speaker, they don't like the answers. It was all about politics, not about petrol, Mr Speaker. It was all about point scoring because those opposite are partisans, not patriots.
Call to the honourable Shadow Treasurer.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that businesses of all sizes will lose the existing 50% capital gains tax discount across all assets?
Call to the Treasurer.
He's a bit slow on the uptake, Mr Speaker. We announced some time ago that there would still be a discount, capital gains. It would move to a discount which reflects the real gains that people make rather than an arbitrary figure. Point number one. Point number two, Mr Speaker, is just on Thursday we announced the next steps in the legislation for the really important tax reforms that we announced on budget night. And what that made clear, was that 98% of all active businesses will be able to access concessions and carve-outs when it comes to the CGT system. And so we made that very clear, Mr Speaker. 100% of small businesses, active small businesses, get access to the turnover threshold, the higher turnover threshold, and that means 98% of active businesses get access to carve-outs and concessions, Mr Speaker, when it comes to those existing 4 concessions in the system. Now, Mr Speaker, once again, I think it says everything about the Shadow Treasurer that he is trying to weaponise a scare campaign against the types of changes that he called for in this parliament and in his book, Mr Speaker. This is a shadow treasurer, time and time again, called on the government to make changes of this kind, and then when we do it, he tries to weaponise a scare campaign against it, Mr Speaker. Now, those opposite what they really want and what their vote the last time this parliament sat tells the whole country is that when they're given the option to vote to make it easier for first home buyers, they vote against it. When they're given the option to vote for more tax cuts for workers, they vote against it, Mr Speaker. And in that regard, they're no different to One Nation, the Nationals, the Liberals. They are all the same when it comes to that, Mr Speaker. Now, if they don't want there to be a fairer go for first home buyers, if they don't want to better align the tax treatment of labour and asset income, as the Shadow Treasurer called for in his book and in the parliament on multiple occasions, if they don't want to cut taxes for workers, they should just say so, Mr Speaker. They shouldn't be hiding behind this dishonest scare campaign that the Shadow Treasurer is especially guilty of.
The call to the honourable member for Bullwinkle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. How is the Albanese Labor government helping more Australians achieve the dream of home ownership? And how will the government's approach benefit more Australians compared with other approaches?
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Cities.
Thanks so much, Speaker. I thank the member for Bullwinkle for her question, and it was absolutely wonderful, Speaker, to be in Western Australia with pretty much our whole Team WA caucus there, having a big forum to talk about what's next for housing in Western Australia, Speaker. We have got incredible advocates fighting for that great state here in our parliament on the Labor side of politics. And, Speaker, the discussion at that forum was all about how do we get our country building more homes and how do we get more young people across our nation getting into that incredible aspiration of owning the home that they live in. And, Speaker, of course, that is what the federal budget was all about, building more homes for Australia and making sure that we back in more young people to get a fair go at auctions. Speaker, in the Australia that you and I grew up in, ordinary people on normal incomes could get into home ownership after saving for just a handful of years. This was a central part of what made Australia a fair and equal country at that time. But, Speaker, that has changed. The average time it takes for a young person to save a deposit in Sydney today, to save a 20% deposit, has gone up to 17 years. Something's got to give, Speaker, and that's why our government has stepped in so significantly. After a decade of ignorance of this problem and total neglect of it, we're stepping in. We're building more homes, we're backing more first home buyers, and we're levelling the playing field at auction. Now, Speaker, just this last weekend gone, we had yet another Sunday of reporting about the auctions that had happened on Saturday, and story after story about first home buyers being at the front of the queue and winning for the first time in a generation. Speaker, you would have read in the 9 papers the report of a young couple who bought their first home at auction in Coburg North in Victoria. This was a 3-bedroom home that had been owned by the same family since 1972. This young couple were able to compete because they were supported through Labor's Help to Buy scheme. And, Speaker, the young couple were very frank when they were interviewed by the newspaper. They said, "We could not have done this without Help to Buy." Now, Speaker, Help to Buy, this is a program that helps 10,000 Australian families on low and moderate incomes get into home ownership in circumstances where they'd otherwise have no real opportunity to do that. Speaker, we're adding on top of this 260,000 Australians who have gotten into first home ownership through our 5% deposit program. And, Speaker, on top of that, 75,000 Australians who will get into first home ownership because of our budget measures. Now, Speaker, these measures are incredibly popular with the young first home buyers in all of our electorates. Why is that the case, Speaker? Because the problem was never about aspiration and drive. The problem was about opportunity, and our government is stepping in. We are creating better opportunities for the young people of this country, and they are winning at auctions for the first time in a generation.
Call to the honourable member for Wide Bay.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister advise whether a bricklayer who comes up with a faster way to lay bricks, a farmer who comes up with a more efficient way to harvest his crops, or a hairdresser who comes up with a new hairstyle will be eligible for the innovative business CGT concession?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When it comes to the examples that the honourable member has used, in every case or in almost every case, they would be included in the new much higher threshold for small business turnover. And so, no, I understand. I understand that the honourable member is asking whether those businesses would apply for this kind of concession. I'm saying they would apply for another kind of concession, which would have a similar effect. And so, when
Order. The Shadow Treasurer and the Leader of the Opposition.
the hairdresser's going to be turning over more than $10 million, is it, mate? Yeah. It might be where you get your haircut.
Order.
I do.
The Treasurer will return to the question. Order.
A little.
Order. Order. Members on my right. Member for Isaacs.
It is.
Order. Just when the House comes to order, I want to hear the remainder of the Treasurer's answer.
The point that I'm making, Mr Speaker, is that there's more than one concession and carve-out available. And for every single active small business, they will be able to access the CGT concessions and carve-outs, and 98% of all active businesses, Mr Speaker. Now, when it comes to farms, I was asked particularly about farms, Mr Speaker, and my understanding is—
Order. Order. We're just going to hear from the manager on a point of order. I mean,
pretty good.
A bit of a difficult time to take a point of order when he was talking about a point of the question, but I'll hear from the manager.
Yeah. Thanks, Speaker. The question was a very specific one around whether they would be eligible for the innovative business capital gains tax concession, not others, whether that one they're eligible.
I thank the manager. The question was about that topic regarding a bricklayer, a farmer and a hairdresser. We've heard from the hairdresser component, and now we're going to hear from the farmer component. And the Treasurer was just about to say, in terms of the farmer that he was asked about by the member for Wide Bay. So I don't know what he's going to say, but I'll make sure he's been directly relevant. But he was specific to the member for Wide Bay, and I want to make sure. Order. Well, I thank the manager for raising the point of order. Treasurer.
Me too, Mr Speaker. I'll touch on the farmers and then I'll go to the start-ups part of the question, Mr Speaker. When it comes to farmers, as a consequence of the implementation details that we announced on Thursday, something like 99% of all agricultural businesses will be eligible for the updated 50% active asset reduction, Mr Speaker. 99% of ag businesses, including farms. And this might be why the National Farmers Federation has described this, and I'm quoting, as one of the most consequential wins for the NFF and its members following sustained advocacy on behalf of farmers, Mr Speaker. That's the NFF taking a more constructive approach than those opposite, Mr Speaker. Now, when it comes to the start-ups paper that we released on Thursday, as we flagged in the budget papers on budget night, we are engaging in good faith in a meaningful and genuine way, and the consultation paper that we released goes to some of the questions that the honourable member asked me about, defining innovation, how long the business is held for, so that we can provide the appropriate amount of concessions and carve-outs for a really important part of our economy, which is the start-up sector.
Call to order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear the Treasurer. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for more.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture. What updates are there on the detection of H5 bird flu in Western Australia? How has the Albanese Labor government been preparing and working with states and territories, industry and the community to respond to this disease?
We call to the Minister for Agriculture, the Minister for Fisheries and the Minister for Forestry.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank our great member for that great question. And I know that he and many other members in this place, but particularly our members from Western Australia, are really concerned over the reporting on the weekend where I announced that CSIRO's Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness has confirmed that brown skua in Western Australia tested positive to the H5 bird flu. Just a few short moments ago before question time, myself, together with the Premier of Western Australia, Roger Cook, and Minister Watt, announced that further testing has confirmed H5 bird flu in a northern giant petrel found in the same region. I'd reiterate that these are two migratory birds. Whilst these two confirmed results are not unexpected given the spread of the H5 globally, they are, of course, very concerning. I also want to be very clear at this time that there's no evidence of any mass mortalities, nor is there any evidence of the bird flu in our poultry or agricultural systems, and also that there's a generally low risk of human infection associated with this strain of the virus. Mr Speaker, I do want to reassure all Australians that we are well prepared for the arrival of the H5 bird flu, and we have been planning for this. Our national biosecurity response arrangements have been enacted, with Western Australia managing the on-ground response. They have responded very quickly to the detection with enhanced surveillance. They're working closely with industry, veterinarians, wildlife carers and local communities. My department, of course the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, is leading the national coordination, and along with our experts, we've been meeting round the clock over the weekend with industry and with jurisdictions, the states and territories, to manage the response to this detection. The head start that we've been given before the arrival of the H5 bird flu has not been wasted by our government, particularly given some of the devastation in wildlife that we have seen overseas. We've invested over $113 million to strengthen our preparedness for H5 bird flu, and this, of course, is part of the more than $2 billion in additional biosecurity resourcing that we have provided since coming to government. It also includes funding delivered directly to the Western Australian Government to support the delivery of rapid, critical diagnostic and decontamination equipment. Our preparedness funding has also made a great difference on the ground, with improved biosecurity measures, particularly for endangered species. We've also been conducting national preparedness exercises right across portfolios with states, territories and the industries. We, of course, have been working really hard in terms of the detection with the public. Can I thank the public for this detection? And I also want to say that this is the system working. I reiterate to the public, if you see sick, multiple dead birds or other animals, please do not touch them, avoid contact and record what you see, and go to birdflu.gov.au.
And on indulgence, I'll call the Leader of the Nationals in the House of Representatives to support the Minister.
Well, thank you, Speaker. And on indulgence, I do thank the Minister for her update, and the Coalition does stand ready to support the government as it deals with this impact of the confirmed detection of H5 aviation influenza in wild birds in Western Australia. It is a serious development, and I do thank the Minister for her willingness to contact me over the weekend and her office's preparedness to provide updates to the Coalition on a regular basis. And we need to be very clear that this is a threat for which the Australian biosecurity system has been preparing for many years. And while we do need to prepare for the worst, we are hoping for the best, and we stand ready as a coalition to support the government, particularly with the potential risk for our poultry sector. Though I do emphasise the Minister's point that these are wild birds that have been detected with the virus, but we do need to do everything we possibly can to ensure that our $8 billion poultry industry and the 60,000 people who work in that supply chain are kept well informed in the coming days and weeks. But I do thank the Minister for her update to the House.
Give a call to the member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Treasurer, regional communities are often the last to get and the first to lose. The bank closures in Regional Australia report was tabled in May 2024. 596 regional towns that once had one or more bank now have no form of bank at all. The report recommended that access to financial services should be recognised as an essential service. Treasurer, it's been more than 2 years. Will you commit to tabling your response before there are any more branch closures?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for her question. And if they're still around, I acknowledge their school from your local community in the parliament as well. We have taken very substantial action since that committee report was handed down. I appreciate that the honourable member is asking me about a process response to the committee inquiry, but we haven't waited for that. We've actually been taking some quite significant steps. I acknowledge the former Assistant Treasurer and the current Assistant Treasurer for all the work that we do in this regard, because we know that local banks can be the lifeblood of country towns, including your beautiful part of Australia. And that's why we worked really hard to keep essential banking services in regional Australia, recognising how important that they are. And if you look at the number of bank closures, between 2017 and 2022, the number of bank branches in regional Australia fell by 29%. About 700 regional bank branches closed under our predecessors. Since we came to office, we've negotiated a moratorium on branch closures for 2.5 years to ensure no regional branch closures by the major banks before July 27. We've secured increased investments in Bank at Post. I acknowledge the communications ministers for that. We've delivered the cash acceptance mandate, released draft legislation on the cash distribution regulatory framework, and our support for regional banking is having a real impact in communities across Australia. The rate of closures under our watch has actually plummeted. Now, having said all of that, Mr Speaker, we do acknowledge that there is more work to do. Actually, a large part of the work that the Assistant Treasurer and I do with the ABA and directly, bilaterally with the banks is about the next steps when it comes to regional banking. We do have more work to do there. We've been upfront about that. I acknowledge Simon Birmingham and others who have been working very closely on that, and we hope to make some more progress before long. We've also been working with the regulators and with communities to try and find sustainable solutions here. So we do recognise how important regional banks are to regional communities like the honourable members. That's why we've taken very significant steps, and that's why there'll be more to come.
Call to the honourable member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How will today's historic signing of Australia's largest ever defence export to Canada deliver high-paid, secure jobs in defence industry?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, can I thank the member for his question and acknowledge his service in wearing our nation's uniform. This morning I did sign an agreement with Canada's State Secretary for Defence Procurement, Stephen Furr, to enable Canada's acquisition of Australia's over-the-horizon radar. This is the biggest defence export in our country's history. It's a $2.5 billion deal, and it surpasses the most recent largest defence export, which was the 2024 sale of Boxers to Germany, and that was a $1 billion deal. And it is no coincidence that the two largest defence exports in our country's history have happened under the Albanese government, because we have given a real focus to defence exports, and in this regard I'd like to acknowledge the Minister for Defence Industry. Now, in working with our friends and partners on shared defence platforms, that is not only good for our national security, it supports Australian industry and it supports Australian jobs. The Canadian deal is supporting 1,000 direct and indirect jobs, principally in South Australia and Victoria. The Boxer deal supported 600 direct jobs in Brisbane. Now, the over-the-horizon radar began its life back in 1986 under the Hawke government in a partnership with BAE Systems Australia. And since then, it has been the cornerstone of our long-range northern surveillance. And it is far and away the best long-range radar in the world. And like Australia, Canada has vast areas to surveil, and so they will use this technology to look north over the Arctic. And what it really means is that Canada and Australia will now be partners in the future development of this technology. And so while Canada will definitely benefit from the decades of investment that we have made in the radar, Australia will also benefit from the hundreds of millions of dollars that Canada will spend on R&D in furthering this technology. Now, Canada and Australia have always been the very best of friends, but as of today, we have a significant strategic dimension to the relationship. It builds on the visit from Prime Minister Carney here in March, which significantly elevated our defence and security partnership. So this is a really big day in the Australia-Canada relationship, but it is a historic day for Australia's defence industry because this is quite literally the Albanese government delivering a future made in Australia.
Call member for Forest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has said time and time again that he has changed his position on his toxic taxes, and yet those taxes on savings, investments, housing and businesses continue to rise. Will the Prime Minister just cut to the chase and, like Julia Gillard before him, just admit he's another Labor liar on taxes?
Order. No, I'll deal with this. The Leader of the House.
Speaker, you've put every member on notice for a long time on that issue.
Yeah, and the Leader of the Opposition has upheld the standards of the House twice today, so I'm going to ask the member for Forest to do the same. To withdraw.
I withdraw.
And leave the chamber under 94A. We're just not going to have those sorts of... And we're moving to the next question. We're not having that disruption for question time. Give a call to the member for Ford.
My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australians to earn more, and what are the risks to Australians' wages?
Call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Ford for his question, but also for his advocacy in ensuring that Australians earn more. Of course, the Albanese Labor government is absolutely committed to supporting Australian workers get ahead. Of course, our reforms have reinvigorated enterprise bargaining, seeing millions of workers receive higher pay increases. Our government has legislated to protect penalty and overtime rates in the modern award safety net, ensuring that these workers' pay packets won't go backwards. And of course, it's been this government that's advocated for a wage increase to the minimum award wages each and every year since we've been in government. And of course, the Fair Work Commission has handed down its most recent decision to deliver a real wage increase for our lowest paid workers. From next week, more than 2.7 million hard-working Australians will start receiving more money in their pay packet. And this means from next week the national minimum wage will have increased more than $12,000 a year over the course of this Labor government. Now, this increase will benefit many hard-working Australians. Some of those hard-working Australians I met this morning, and they're up in the gallery today, and I thank them for their visit. Workers like Pratchie, who is a supermarket worker. Pratchie told me this morning that for her and her workmates, this wage increase means that they are being seen. It means that they count. This increase will also benefit workers like Braden, who works in fast food. He said this increase will make a difference to him and his family. And for Riley, who works in retail, he said that this pay rise is incredibly important and the extra money per hour will really help him. Now, of course, Speaker, I'm asked about what the biggest risk is to Australians' pay packets. Well, the biggest risk is to higher wages is the three-ring circus over there, the three-ring right-wing parties.
Order.
Of course, because when the coalition was last in government, they never once advocated for a pay increase for our lowest workers. Of course, just a few weeks ago, the Liberal Party, the National Party, the One Nation Party refused time and time again to back in a working... Well, you know, we hear the Shadow Treasurer chirping away. He needs to understand not all publicity is good publicity. Now, it's clear, it is really clear that there is only one political party in this country that stands up for working Australians, and that is the Australian Labor Party.
Good call to the member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, the capital gains tax and negative gearing changes announced in the May budget were significant and market-sensitive measures. So significant, your government has already walked past of them back in recent days. Can the Prime Minister give the House a strong assurance that no government MP or their close relations used prior knowledge of those changes for private financial benefit before they were made public?
Order. I'll just deal with this. I'm not particularly happy with that regarding the standing orders, regarding the imputations that was contained in that question. We don't want to go down We don't want to go down a path where people are being accused of things or allegations in questions. So, well, there are some imputations in that question. I'll hear from the Leader of the House. We'll deal with this. The member for Fowler, we'll get through this.
Mr Speaker, I know that there's normally some level of levity that's taken, but the rules are the question can't contain argument, inference, imputation, insults. It's all there.
Order. Order. The issue, we'll deal with this, and I'll give the member Fowler the call. But when you're saying things that, whether MPs or the Prime Minister or their close relations using prior knowledge of these changes, that's a dangerous path to go down. So, is the member for Fowler seeking to rephrase the question?
Speaker, I'm happy to rephrase the question.
Okay.
Can the Prime Minister give the House assurance that this information was properly safeguarded before the budget and were held so that no one connected to or in government was able to act on it for private financial benefit?
Yeah. I'll just ask the Prime Minister to ignore the last part of the question because that is not within the standing orders. The Prime Minister has the call.
So the member for Fowler, if she's got a suggestion or an allegation about anyone in the chamber, she should actually say it, what it is, and preferably say it outside.
Order.
This isn't a council. This is a serious parliament. And one of the things that we do...
Order. Order.
One of the things that we do, Mr Speaker...
Members on my left will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister will pause. I don't know. The member for Fowler on a point of order.
I think the Prime Minister should have some respect in the House.
Resume your seat. Yeah. Order. The member for Solomon. Order. The House is going to come to order. 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 The Treasurer. Just allow the House to come so the Prime Minister can deal with the question.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. No one's done more for local government in this House than me.
Order. Order. The member for Casey. Order.
Mr Speaker, part of the critique from some in the three right-wing parties and their cheer squad outside has been that there wasn't enough consultation before the tax announcements that were made. We were very careful, as always occurs, and I'm sure, as has always occurred for as long as I've been here across the board, whoever has been the Treasurer and gone through our ERC processes. That is something that we have in this country that we should cherish and we should honour, not denigrate to try to score a cheap point. I make this point, that around 65,000 taxpayers in Fowler will benefit from the WATO. When it comes to student debt relief, 24,000 people benefited. There's been 3.4 million cheaper scripts in the electorate of Fowler. The Liverpool Medicare Urgent Care Clinic, I note that all our urgent care clinics are now open has received 19,900 visits.
Order. Members on my left.
And there are now 86 fully bulk bill practices.
Order. The member for Fowler has taken her point of order. No, resume your seat. I'm not entertaining the point of order.
And I had the pleasure yesterday, it must be said, with the member for Werriwa and the member for McMahon of being in south-west Sydney just yesterday. And it's a great part of Sydney. We were there for the opening of an Assyrian community hall at St Joseph's. It was a fantastic community, and it was great to spend more time in south-west Sydney. And I look forward to spending more time in the months and years ahead in south-west Sydney advocating for the interests of the people there genuinely.
Call to the honourable member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting early educators while keeping costs down for parents? What has been the response?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank my friend, the hero from Holt, for a question? And happy birthday to little Aaliyah, who's turned 1 just in the last couple of weeks. Am I right? Fantastic.
Order.
It's only Monday. It's only Monday. Childcare workers do one of the most important jobs in this country, but you wouldn't know it from historically what they've been paid. And when we were first elected a couple of years ago, childcare workers were leaving the job in droves. Not because they didn't love the job, but because they couldn't afford to keep doing it. Because you could get paid more stacking shelves than you could educating the most precious things in our lives, our kids. If you want proof of that, look at the data. In some centres, the attrition rate was 40%. 40%. It's 40% of the workforce leaving the job they love in any given year. And that's a crisis, but it's now changed. And it's changed for a reason, because of the 15% pay rise that we've now delivered. And if you want proof of that, job vacancies are now down 31%. Job applications in some places are up 30%, and there are now 20,000 more childcare workers doing that sort of life-changing work right across the country. In other words, it's worked. Turns out if you pay people more people want to do the job. And that's why what we announced last week is so important. And it's the sort of thing that only a Labor government would do. It's good for workers, but it's also good for parents, because as part of the deal, for childcare centres to get this extra funding, they've also got to cap their fees. And over the last 2 years or so, that has saved parents a lot of money, and what we announced last week will save them even more. What we announced last week will save the average family with a child in childcare about $1,500 over the next 2 years. Again, it's the sort of thing that only a Labor government would do. The Liberal Party would never do it. The Liberal Party with the orange logo up the back would never do it. It's only a Labor Party that would do this. Real cost of living help, pushing wages up and keeping costs down for parents. But we also announced something else last week. There's nothing more important than the safety of our kids, and that's why we've set a new condition. In order for centres to get this money, they've also got to be at the national safety standard. 95% of centres are at the national safety standard now. I want it to be at 100%. I think parents expect it to be at 100%. And that's why we're doing this. It builds on the safety reforms that we're already rolling out. It's what every parent in this country would expect, and it's what every child in this country deserves.
The Prime Minister.
I ask for further questions to be placed on the notice paper.